All right. Get my window straightened up. Chat. Sweet. All right. Get code open. Welcome. Okay, perfect. Let's see if I have this one. Just work our way there. Cool. All right. What is it? 7:02 Central Time, almost 7:03. So we'll hang out maybe one more minute, see if anybody else joins up with us, and then we'll get started and jump into looking at JavaScript array methods and the different times you want to use the different ones and what makes them different and differentiates them from each other. Might as well get the MDN docs open for each. Okay. At some point, I'm probably going to lean over this way. It's just going to be turn off my space heater in the office because it's going to get hot in here in any moment. All right, cool. So to start out, before we get started, get going, I guess I can get going after I ask this because don't need to wait specifically, but let me know where you are at in the curriculum, like what you're working on or what major section you're in, general section you're in, just so I can kind of get a grasp of where everybody's at. And yeah, so I've set up some basic HTML here and just an index document that, cool. We can work with, excuse me. And we're just gonna write some JavaScript and take a little bit of data and display it, one, in the DOM with vanilla JavaScript, but two, mutate it using some of these array methods. So we're just, the script's included here, array.js. We're just going to write all of our code in this JavaScript file. When we run it in when we refresh our page, our code will run, and we'll see any of our console stuff and such. So, cool. So first thing we are going to look at is going to be forEach. I guess I can bump this up. Okay, it makes them all bigger. That's cool. So first things first, this is MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, as it was branded before. I guess they shortened it to MDN at some point just for branding. And this is the web docs. And Mozilla being, a foundation, an open source company by nature, they took on this task of creating this documentation place, developer.mozilla.org. And it's actually grown like outside the scope of just JavaScript. For a long time, it was like the JavaScript place to go. But even like Microsoft is moving a lot of their MSDN, Microsoft Developer Network articles, into MDN to kind of make it this central repository and make it even more beneficial to developers as a whole. So these are all, while there is like a foundation that funds a lot of this, we can see contributors to this page. Like it's open source. All these people have contributed to this in some way, shape, or form. Last update was yesterday, November 12th. So everything stays really up to date. There's amazing people behind this site that keep it going and keep it up to speed. So MDN is the place to go to find JavaScript information. I know there's a ton more in there. I just typically only come here for JavaScript stuff. So the main parts of the documentation when you're on a method. So this is a method page. It is the forEach method on the array prototype. So JavaScript being a prototypical based language, not a class-based language, we have the array prototype that we have methods on. So forEach is going to be one of our array methods. And the way that I work with this documentation that I've found the most beneficial to me, not necessarily, you know, the what works the best for you, but just what I've found works well for me, is I like looking at code. Like, okay, how does this work? I can read it, but actually seeing it work. So I like just reading kind of the quick method executes a provided function once for each array element. I like looking at, you know, the code, the example code, running it. Lots of times I will play around in here. So I'll do like, you know, you can write whatever you want in here. If you can spell it right. And run it. We'll see, we get 2 console logs, the exclamation points now. It doesn't even have to be this forEach. So, you know, we could write any valid JavaScript in here and it'll run. So I like playing around in there some, but really I look at the quick summary, the example typically will give some insight. If it's not enough, start scrolling down. The syntax is going to be the next largest piece. So really, because the syntax gives all the optional things as well, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. So with forEach, we see it takes a callback function as an argument. And that callback function also takes in as many as 3 arguments, although most likely we'll only use the first 2, and a lot of times only just the first 1. So the first one is the only one that's required. So sometimes this syntax of how things are set up is confusing. It's showing optional with square brackets. It is what it is. But the other big part of the syntax is the return value. So one of the key differentiators of most of these array methods is going to be their return value. So they will work in very similar ways, being a method that takes a callback function and typically has some optional parameters, but the return value will be different. And then typically don't read the description. I go back to it if I'm trying to garner better understanding or I still don't understand it. And I go to the examples because that's just how my mind works. I look at the examples because the code is like, okay, this is how this works. I see this example. I see what it outputs, see what it inputs. And that is typically how I work through it. You know, I look at an example, look at the syntax, look at more examples. If I still need info, I go to the description and start reading. So we'll be looking at forEach first. So let's get into some code. Bump that up some. Okay, so I've got the HTML done already. So let's start working with some stuff. I have an array of items. And I'm sure these prices are off now because everything's on sale. Lots of things are on sale. Price $4.99. I guess the iPhone's price just keeps going up, so. Cool. It's an array of objects, and that will be kind of our data that we're going to work with through this. There's all these examples. So we're just going to start with the forEach taking a callback. We're just going to console log. So we're doing pretty much the exact same thing from the docs, this example. forEach function element, console log the element. So we're calling forEach on the array. Here we're calling forEach on the items array, and just console logging. When we go back to our page and refresh, we see we get our 3 elements in the console. So, okay, we're looping through every element in the array, no matter what. So now this, forEach is great for when we want to do things with the DOM for everything in a collection. So, let's say we want to display everything on the page. Let's see, we have a items ID here. So we can do something like items div document.get element by ID items. So I'm going to do some DOM manipulation throughout our discussion. Any questions, please stop me and ask. I'm going to gloss over a little bit of that whole part of it, because we're really here to look at the array methods and how they work and what they do, not so much, adding LIs to the DOM with JavaScript. But if you want to go down that path, we can as well. Items, actually, let's just push that down some. We probably would use or would see arrow functions these days. Something like that. Y equals document.create element li. The text for the li. Item.name. Item.price. Just got a string now. Append child. What am I appending? The text. And then appending the li to the div. Okay. When we run our code now, we should see a list of them in this all items section. Items UL. Oh, items div. I guess it is UL. That's more accurate. Okay, so there we go. We've stuck our items onto the DOM in a list. Sweet. So when I said one of the times that we want to use forEach is instead of or when we want everything in a collection in an array to do DOM work with it, because typically we don't need a return value in that case. You know, we're doing some work here on these lines to everything, but we don't need to return anything out of it. You know, once we append it and attach it to the DOM, that's all we need to do with it. So forEach is also an alternative to for loops. So instead of writing a, you know, for let I equal 0, I less than items dot length, I plus plus, and then we could do this type of thing in here. We probably need one more piece where we'd say, you know, item equals items I, because that'll be the current number. You know, so instead of doing a for loop, we can use a forEach and the callback function to accomplish the same thing. And you know, implicitly iterating over an entire array is when we use forEach. Oh, I'll comment this out. I'll leave it here for now because I think it's a good comparator. So how are we feeling about forEach and what we've looked at and what we've done so far? Any questions, anything that needs some more clarification? How's it going? Awesome. So if anything does pop up in your mind, you know, at any time, just feel free to ask. Don't worry if like it's 30 minutes from now, you're like, oh wait, what about forEach in this situation? Go for it. All right, so up next. Oh, I forgot. I want to put these links here in the chat. Oh, another thing about MDN, I find it's very hard to get to like here from the homepage. Even when I like search here, like forEach, watch it come up as the first one. No, like keyboard layout map.forEach, set prototype forEach. So it does come up as the third one, but we see map prototype forEach. There's a lot of them because there's a lot of documentation here. So typically we see all the topics on the right that we can search for and through. Typically when I'm searching, I will do something like forEach JS MDN. And we see the top search result is where we just were, array prototype forEach JavaScript MDN. So really, if you know the method, but you can't remember the exact syntax for it, searching for the method name with JS and MDN will kind of scope you in right there on it. And I think that's kind of a helpful tip to have in getting to the things you need. So up next is map. So we see the map method creates a new array with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. So if we look, we start off with this array 1. We call a map with a callback function. And we set that equal to a new variable. Then we console log the map, and we see it's twice everything in the original array. So we run it to 1832. If we look at the syntax, it is exactly the same as forEach. The only difference is this says .map. And anything that said forEach before says map now. The big difference here is the return value, a new array with each element being the result of the callback function. And one key thing about the result is that it is what is returned. So we see in here, return element for new array. So if we don't return something, we won't have anything in here. So if we wrap this in curly braces, we no longer have our implicit return from this arrow function, which was happening before. And if we run this, you see we get 4 undefineds. So map isn't going to skip these elements. It's going to say, okay, I iterated over something, but I didn't get any return value, so now it's undefined. So something that can definitely throw you off sometimes in using map is forgetting to explicitly return something. And in an example like this, it doesn't seem as obvious, but sometimes X is an object and not just an array. So let's say we'll just do kind of what we have, price. No, you can't map over an object. I don't know what I'm thinking. An array of objects you can. That's what I'm thinking of. So a lot of, API responses are JSON formatted. And if you have an array of stuff in JSON, it's typically going to be an array of objects. So now we have, object array map, and then we have X is this object. So we might have something where it's like const name equals, or we could structure it, if that'll work in here, I don't know, equals X, like return X to uppercase. I think that will work. We'll see. No, it doesn't like that. I don't think. X.name. No, I'm messing it up somewhere. But the idea being unexpected token. I thought you could use var, maybe not. Okay, either way, the idea being sometimes you have a lot more stuff that you're going to do in your map, and hence you need to remember the explicit return as opposed to, or you'll have a full array of undefineds. Okay, so let's look at map in our example. Actually, we didn't look at our documentation. So we looked at the syntax, difference being the return value, and no, that was it. It's just really the syntax looking at to start. So let's say we want there to be a $sign in front of these numbers, That's kind of bland. So we can do that. And we could do this probably a little simpler by just, adding a $sign in here before the price. So that would be more straightforward. But we're going to do it this way just for the sake of understanding and learning. So we have our items. Let's say modified items, items.map. Item. I want to return an object with the same name, but a price that is with that $sign now. And then when we iterate, let's iterate over modified items, because that should now give us the new one. And let's console log so we can see what's going on. Cool. When we refresh now, you see we have $signs. And if we look at our original array and our modified array, we see the difference. We've done two different things. We've modified two things. We modified the data type of the price. It's no longer an integer, but it is a string. And the other thing we did was we added on that $sign. So the main reason that we use map is when we need to modify the elements of an array and return a new array. So any questions about map? Where are we feeling good about map? Anything you've run into with it that you might want to look at? So we can also write this a little bit differently if we wanted to. So arrow functions have an implicit return we can utilize. So you get rid of these curly braces, get rid of the return. The issue here is that when we use the implicit return with an object, it now thinks that the object's curly brackets are its curly brackets, the functions. So we need to wrap that in parentheses. And then it'll work right if I get my stuff lined up. We can get rid of the return keyword if we so choose. When we refresh, we see everything still works right. If we were just returning a string or something, then we could get rid of the extra parentheses if we wanted to. A lot of people like having the parentheses there for the blocking. Having a block without any open or closing brace of any sort feels kind of weird, in JavaScript at least. So cool. All right, next up, we'll look at filter. The filter method creates a new array with all elements that pass the test implemented by the provided function. So this is going to create a new array. It's going to be like map, where it's creating a new array with the results of anything that passes the test. So this is using a comparator to populate the array. So we won't get undefined if something doesn't pass. We'll just get, it'll just filter out our unwanted results. We see here, we say words that are greater than 6, word lengths greater than 6. So we just end up with the 3 words that have a length greater than 6. So on the right side, the body of our function, if that comes back true, then that element is put into the array. If it comes back false, that element is left out of the new array. So we look at the syntax, and it's very similar. I don't know why whoever did this didn't make it like exactly the same as forEach and map in the sense of the structure, where those both of those two, their syntax was 3 lines, and this one is only 1. But either way, it has the same things. It also has element instead of current value here, but it's just the same exact structure as the other two we've looked at. Now, a key is in the return value, a new array with the elements that pass the test. If no elements pass the test, an empty array will be returned. And that's really good to know, because if we were to look at, the truthiness of an empty array, it comes back true. So if you were using, some sort of if array.filter, item.price greater than 50 or something. Well, there's issues there. But that sort of idea, that would always return true, because no matter what, filter is going to return at least an empty array, and that's going to be true. So knowing that is a good piece of information to have. Cool. So let's look at some more code. This time, let's say we wanted to take the items and filter the ones that are above $300. And then we'll present those on the page. So we have our modified items. Let's put this here. It's expensive items, because it's still going to have kind of the same structure as this, and the prices aren't going to be changed yet. So I think it'll look better there. So let's say items.filter, item.price greater than 300. And let's console log those. And we want to stick them on the DOM too. So let's see. We have a UL called expensive items. So we can just do this, change this around. We'll change that to expensive items. We'll change this to expensive items, I believe, right? Expensive dash items. Yeah, because that isn't JavaScript. And this will be let's do what we talked about before, throw an extra $sign in here for those. Yeah, I think that'll do it. So we're only going to get back the items that are greater than 300 based on this first array. We'll refresh. No, they are. Sweet. If we look at our different arrays, we have this one that just has the 2, the original 3, and the modified 3. So filter is used when we need to select a subset of items in an existing array and group them in a new array. So how are we feeling about filter? So Andrew's feeling good. Sweet. Awesome, buddy. So something that I think complements filter well is going to be find. And I actually didn't have it up already. Say find JSMDN, array prototype find. So find returns the value of the first element in the array that satisfies the provided testing function. Otherwise, undefined is returned. So it's the same idea where you have to pass it, a true or false, expression. However, in this case, you only get the first element that matches, or one element. So this is useful when you know that your elements are unique. If you're looking for a certain ID or something like that, or something of that nature. I bring this up because I didn't know about find, and I was using filter, and I was like using filter to get a single thing. It was like item.id equals, some item ID that I got somewhere else in my application. And then I was calling the first element because the filter was returning an array with one element, and I was getting that single element. And later I found find, and I was like, oh, all those filters can just be find. And that does two things. One, it cleaned up my code because I got rid of that part and just changed this to find. But also, it's going to be a little bit more performant because filter is actually going to go through every element in that array, checking the true false value. So if I had an array with, a few hundred elements, a few thousand elements, 10,000 elements, it's going to take a minute. But with find, as soon as it finds that if it's the fifth element in that array, it's going to stop because it's only supposed to return one. If it's the last one, it might take a little bit of time, but it makes it quicker on average. So actually didn't have find in my notes for discussion, but did want to bring it up because I feel it's kind of a complementary array method to filter, because I used it I used filter in this exact same way until I knew about find. So does find, does that make sense? What are we thinking? Any questions about find? Cool. So find when you want one element, filter when you want multiple elements. Same sort of thought process behind both, though. Okay, I'm going to turn off the heater. 1 second. All right. So let's move on to, and I'll throw this in the filter find into the chat. Okay, reduce. Reduce is going to be the one that's different from the rest. So the reduce method executes a reducer function. So not just a callback function, but a reducer function. And the reducer function we provide. So it's really very little out of the box. It's going to go through all the elements for us. And the reducer function happens on each member of the array, and then it results in a single output value. And in most of, the more straightforward examples, we see taking reduce and, summing things and things like that. But there's a lot of really cool things you can do with reduce, ordering letters and objects and things like that, and moving them around. Reduce is pretty powerful when you start searching for ways to do ordering of things. But are these prototype? So yes, so ES6 classes are actually just syntactic sugar on top of the prototype. So there is no true object-oriented class in JavaScript. There is the class, but everything is just on top of this type of thing. So the class doesn't actually give us anything new. It's more just a different way of writing things. So if we actually look at I know this says this here because I looked at it just like a day ago. JavaScript classes introduced in ECMAScript 2015 or ES6 are primarily syntactical sugar over JavaScript's existing prototype-based inheritance. The class syntax does not introduce a new object-oriented inheritance model to JavaScript. So it's just a different way of doing the same thing. It's, yeah, everything that's available to the prototypes are available in the classes as well. But yeah, good question. And yeah, this is semi-confusing because JavaScript is making itself kind of appear like an object-oriented language, but at the root of it, JavaScript is not a pure object-oriented language. It is still a prototypical-based language. And I think JavaScript is doing things to be more developer-friendly from developers from other languages to have a higher adoption rate. And I think it's working really well. Everybody's writing JavaScript now, or lots and lots more people than 10 years ago. But yeah, our reducer. So our reducer takes this accumulator function. And the reducer function, the reducer takes a reducer function. And the reducer function is fed 4 parameters: an accumulator, a current value, a current index, and a source array. Now, all 4 of these aren't required. Only the first 2 are. The accumulator and the current value are. So those are going to be the 2 that we'll concentrate on. And then the return value is the results of the reduction. So it's going to be a single value that's returned out of here. I think something also that's very important is this initial value. And we'll see why just a little bit, but it's the value to be used as the first argument to the first call of the callback. If no initial value is applied, the first element in the array will be used. Calling reduce on an empty array without an initial value is an error. So really, we'll look at the example of what the initial value does. But let's look at reduce in our code. So what if we wanted to calculate the average price of the items and then display it on the page? So we would need to do that. Let's do that down here. All right. Total price. This is going to be items.reduce. So we're going to have an accumulator, which is just going to be a variable. So we'll say total. Then we'll have the individual item. And let's just put parentheses, so we won't have to write an explicit return. We'll just use our implicit return from the parentheses. And we can say total plus item.price. Now, if we go and look at a deeper example here. Now this is showing very verbosely showing all of the available things that you can pass, the function. But if we basically strip out current index and array, we have our same function. We're returning the accumulator plus the current value. We're returning the total plus the price, basically the current value. Now, when we look at this array, we see we have 5 elements, and this would be invoked 4 times, it says. And it's like, well, if it's going over every element, why is it only going to happen 4 times? So if we don't provide an initial value, it will use this first element as the initial value. So we see as the accumulator's initial value and skip it. So we see the first accumulator here is 0. And that's the first element. And the first current value is 1 here. And we see the current index is 1. So we're starting with this one as the first current value, and the first element is the initial value of the accumulator. I know this gets confusing. However, in a simple addition like this, it works out. You know, everything is just added up. Now, what if we wanted to take everything and like double it? So total plus, I guess we don't technically need the parentheses because of order of operations, but item price times 2. Now, our issue will fall from, actually, let's console log. Yeah, console log. Actually, I want to see, can't remember. I refresh this. We'll have our array. Yeah, okay, so let's just write it here. So we have our items, and we can see the output. So let's say items.reduce total item. That will be, we're going to do our return total plus item.price. Oh, where'd that come from? Total. Okay, so we're seeing we have an issue here. One being we're using that first object as our initial value. So we're adding the prices to that object. So we get a string that says object, and then we have 2 other pieces that are added together. It's having issues. Even if we had an array, let's just say, like this, and we do, you know, example.reduce. Need one more parentheses in there. Total item, total plus item dot, or just total plus item, because that's the current value and it's an integer. Okay, so we get 6. Now, that's 1, 2, and 3. If we were to do what I started writing, say like item times 2, you know, let's say we want to double everything. We see we get 11. However, 1 doubled is 2, 2 doubled is 4, so 2 plus 4 plus 6, and that's 12. So the issue is that first time through, we skip the 1 as the current value, and we make it equal to total. So we start with 1 plus 2 times 2. So then we've skipped doubling this first element. So that's where the initial value really comes into play. And I feel like while it's optional, I feel like it's one of those things that it's very good practice to always include it in here. So we can say 0. Now, these second parameters always look odd because of where they end up over here. However, if we were to collapse all this down, let's say we take all this out of the inside of here, we see that 0 is just the second argument for this reduce method. If we look at the yellow parentheses that are the reduce method, it has a function, a comma, an integer. So even though it ends up all the way over here and sometimes even further down the page, that's where it's just the second argument. Oh, I bumped it up. The second argument for the reduce method. And we actually don't need price times 2, just item price. I guess it's going to put it on one line. And then we need to stick that, well, So if no initial value is provided, the first time through, total is the first element of the array. So in this case, total would be items. It would start as this object. And then the first time through the current value, the item would be this one. So we'd start the current value, the item iterator, at index 1, and the total would be index 0. And then the next time through, our reduce, our accumulator would do its thing, and the current value would be index 2, and whatever we returned out of that last time through would be the total. All right, we have our total price, and we're trying to get the average. So we need to say average price, and let's see, let's make sure this works right here. Okay, 299 plus 499 plus 1299. Yeah, 2097. Okay, it's like I can't do that math in my head. Average price will be our total price divided by items dot length, and then we have average element over here. Yeah, div with an ID, average price. Average price, and then average element dot append. If we console log, let's say average price. Yeah, why not? Average price. Okay, and we run all this we should see the average price is on the page, $6.99. Cool. Average price console log. Seeing all of our different arrays that we've worked with throughout our discussion. So how clear are we on the reduce method? Because I know it's a little bit, well, it's completely different from the other ones, and that accumulator can be a hard thing to grasp how it's really working at. I know it took me a while to really, kind of understand what was going on. I did put the docs in there.
What you said makes sense. I feel like I'll probably need to play around with it on my own to really grasp it.
Yeah. It's one of those things, I feel like in a lot of these study groups and study sessions, it's like we've worked really hard on our notes to be very clear and straightforward and make sense. So I think a lot of times it's like, oh, that all makes so much sense right now. And then 20 minutes from now, you're trying to do it and you're like, this makes no sense at all. I think I try and point out the little things that'll get you. The returns in things like map. If you don't return out of the iterator, you'll have issues. I know I debugged that for an hour once with someone in the React section, and they were mapping through React elements, but they weren't returning them. And in one spot, they had used map without curly braces, so it returned implicitly. And in the other place, they did use curly braces, and it wasn't returning implicitly. So it was like, why is this not working? And it was because nothing was being returned out. So React can't do anything with a bunch of undefineds. And then that initial value is also a big one that can bite you, because you'll be off by just that initial value. You know, if you're doing some more complex math other than just addition or subtraction, and like it'll appear to be working because you'll get a total, you know, but it'll be off by just enough that it's wrong. And you'll start wrecking your brain trying to figure out what you did wrong, because everything will look right. But yeah. Any other questions? We went through, what did we go through? Went through map and forEach and filter and find, although it's not in here. Map, forEach, filter, find, and reduce.
I have a quick question. If we are writing any